Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Diverse Governance. This is our 5th in 6 conversations about the need for diversity in school governance. This afternoon's theme is looking at why to join a governing body, how to get on a board, and what does the role include, specifically for governors who are non-educationists. With me this afternoon, we have got Jordan Holder. Jordan is a Senior Enterprise Coordinator at New Anglia LEP. He works with businesses, education and local authority partners to drive growth across Norfolk and Suffolk. He's been a governor for 3 years. We then have Josie Vigasi, a BBC journalist and a governor in a local secondary school. She can actually see it out the window of her flat. We have Alex Kumar, who is a professional musician, a trainee barrister and a chair of governors. We have Cheryl Conley, who actually works as Director of Training at Agbus, one of our partners for this series. She is a governor in the independent sector. And we have Caris Graham-Moore, a lawyer at Linklaters and a governor at a local primary school. He actually joined governance during the middle of a lockdown. So thank you and welcome to the governance chat this afternoon. Jordan, tell us a bit more about your journey to being a governor and what is entailed.
Yeah, of course. So I've been a governor, as you mentioned, for just over 4 years this September, which seems crazy. But yeah, joining a governing body, that was probably one of the easiest bits of it, to be honest. There was a campaign going around Suffolk County Council, and I got the email saying, join a governing body, and I thought, okay, how hard can it be? Let's do it. And some back and forth between you and the school. And it was ran by Schools Choice locally here, and you have a few meetings with the staff, and then you're away. So that's sort of how I joined. In terms of why I wanted to join, firstly, it's because I'd taken on a new role, and my background had always been in business, and the new role was in education. So for me, it was trying to gain a greater understanding around the inner workings of a school. I'd only known it since when I was at school, and that was mainly just moaning about going to maths, really. So that was a huge part of it, learning about education. The other part was when I was at school, I didn't have a huge amount of role models that looked like me. And I thought the only way to change that is to actually get up and do something about it. And that was a big driver for me, to make sure that more young people have role models that look like them and have similar backgrounds and experiences and challenges, but also trying to provide opportunities for them moving forwards. So that was a huge part for me. And I think in terms of over these almost 4 years, what have I gained from it? One of those things will be a real deep respect for challenges of the community that I live in and of folks here that I would never have understood or acknowledged just because the work I do, and that I don't come across some of those challenges. And that gives you a real understanding of what's going on right where you live, and you feel a bigger part of that community. So that was a huge part of it. Obviously, yes, you gain communication skills, leadership, and all of those sorts of things, which have been incredibly valuable to complement my current job role. But having that understanding around what's going on in my community, that's massive. So yeah, briefly, that's sort of my governor journey so far.
Thank you so much, Jordan. So Josie, tell us about you. How did you become a governor? Where are you a governor? And what's the journey been like for you?
Well, it's interesting that Jordan talks about community, and you obviously mentioned that I literally am 100 metres away from the school that I'm a governor in, which is in South London, just off the Old Kent Road. Diverse, busy secondary school. It was there as a school when I first moved into my flat, but the school has evolved and was across 2 sites. And I started really being even more aware of it, I guess, on my doorstep when they were starting a rebuild. It was becoming part of a MAT. It's one of the art schools, and it just kind of, I had a more interest. Hang on, what's all this building work going on? How's that's going to affect my life as well as affect the life of those young people? So I kind of was just a bit more engaged in it. However, it wasn't in terms of governing that I was expecting to connect with them. I had been thinking about being a governor for a while. Various people have mentioned to me, I was about 10 years into my BBC career, ready to kind of stretch my own wings a bit, try some different things, build my own networks and skills beyond the day job. So I just contacted my borough and just, Googled it. And it turned out you could just fill in an online form. Did that, kind of in my head thinking primary. I think because I'd considered primary education as a career previous. I come from a family of teachers. and just hadn't thought about secondary, to be honest. Although I was working in the sphere of teenagers in terms of the day job a bit. Got contacted by the local borough, literally just given a primary school, and all around the same time that was happening, and I hadn't actually had time to follow up with the primary school to start having a conversation. I met on the street the principal of the school across the road, started talking to him, and he clearly wanted a community governor who sat on his doorstep to connect with him and the evolving school as it became a MAT. The rest is kind of history. He put me in touch with the MAT. I had a conversation, and nearly 8 years on, I am still their governor, and I now, about 4 years on, 4 years ago, I took up the safeguarding link role, which for me, in terms of my governor experiences, has allowed me to evolve too and pick up some specialisms and evolve my own kind of skills in an area that I was always interested in, but has actually been really beneficial for work and for the role that I play in terms of the school. But yeah, essentially, I see those young people day in, day out. I see those parents, I see those teachers going home when I'm coming home, late at night, or used to. It was really about me connecting and being able to be a critical friend to a community that is literally on my doorstep.
Thank you so much, Josie. How about you, Alex? How did you become a governor, and what's your journey been like?
So I've been school governor at my primary school for some 2 years now, and for the past 6 months of which I've been chair of governors. Initially, I certainly had no intention of becoming chair of governors. I initially decided I might want to become a school governor. Well, primarily, just to give back to the community, as people have mentioned. Also to open up a new, quite different front in my life and my career and how I spend my time and so on. I, of course, had no background in teaching nor in schools. I had a casual interest in education policy, largely just due to having a friend from university who works in research to do with that. And I had a range of what I thought was entirely unrelated experience, although I've come to realize that a lot of that experience can be quite useful as a school governor. So I signed up to Inspiring Governance and was contacted by a few schools, and then I pursued one of those and was co-opted to the board. And then with the training and the guidance available and the mentoring of then chair of governors, I found myself increasingly able to contribute after quite a learning curve, where to begin with, I found it very difficult to contribute at all. With time, I found myself increasingly effective in that role, found the role enjoyable and interesting, quite different to a lot of other things I do in my career. There is, as I mentioned, opportunity to bring forwards all kinds of non-schools related experience and abilities to contribute. And after a greater part of a year, I became vice chair. And then, of course, global events conspired to sabotage all our plans, both career-wise and personally, last year. So then I found myself taking a lead among the governors during the pandemic. And then when the outgoing chair stepped down, I took over. So I've been chair for about half a year now, which has been challenging, with the pandemic presenting plenty of new challenges, but rewarding. It's included recruiting a number of new governors, recruiting a new clerk, which is very important. I think we might all agree there. And convening a working group to look at the longer term strategic direction and planning for the school, as well as playing the role of something of an advisor, certainly a critical friend to the head teacher during a number of challenges to the head teacher as well as to the governors. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Bit of a whirlwind there. And I think we see in the press, we say lots of thank yous to the educators, but we do need to say big thank you to the governors, because actually it's been a massive year for governance, hasn't it? In supporting head teachers, supporting schools, and in navigating the craziness of lockdown and COVID-19. Cheryl, how about you? How did you end up being a governor, and how does it sit alongside your day job?
Well, it's quite interesting because similar to Josie, Jordan and Alex so far, you'll gather from my accent, I actually went down south. And when I went down south, I wanted to give something back to my community because I didn't know the area. And at the time, I was an inspector of the Audit Commission, so you can't inspect where you live. So I was in a non-education job, and I thought it would be good if I contacted my local county council and see if I could become a governor at the local secondary school, which is literally down the road. So not too dissimilar to Josie. I see all the children going to school, which is absolutely lovely. And that's in the maintained sector. But we're in a very fortunate catchment area where we've got a lot of schools in a very close area. So the choice was really good, actually, from a county council perspective. So I did get the one that was just down the hill. And joined is what I would call is a normal governor. You go to your first board meeting, you sit there quite frightened, knowing what to ask, what are the right questions. But we had an absolutely amazing chair of governors who kept on saying, embark on all the National Governors Association training. We want you to be inducted properly. We want you to build that confidence. And then within about a year, because of my audit background, I became chair of finance. And then from that, I became chair of governors. And when I look back to see when I first became a governor, it was actually 20 years ago. So that makes me feel quite old. So for the next 17 years, I was a chair of governors at the secondary school. But then because we had a feeder primary school, I became a governor there because they wanted to have those community links. Because at the time, they were going through their journey to convert to an academy. So they wanted that business case. So that was really interesting. And then I actually jumped ship about 15 years ago, came out from being an inspector because I became a mum and realised it wasn't great travelling and not seeing your child. So I actually went into education as what they call as a bursar clerk. So I had to stop being a governor in that school because I became the bursar clerk at the school I joined 20 years ago, but still remained a governor at the primary school. So I ended up converting that secondary school into a multi-academy trust, which in itself is quite mind-boggling, but I could see it from both perspectives, from a governor's perspective as well as a bursar. And then stayed as a governor while I was in the maintained sector, and then moved into the independent sector in 2016, and then became a governor in another independent school while still being a governor at a maintained school. And it was really interesting, their approaches to training and development for governance. And then in September 2019, became Director of Training at Agris, which promotes matching governors with schools. So I'm very passionate about that because I think everybody on this call this evening knows that if you want to give something back to a school, your richness and your diversity and your background is so important, because you ask the constructive challenge questions to the executive teams, and there's nothing wrong with actually saying why and why do we do it like this. So I'm in my ideal job now because it's great to meet so many governors, train them as well, and no question's a silly question, and just working more with everybody in the sector.
Thank you, Cheryl. Lots of different experiences there. Like we think diversity of lived experience, but actually the diversity of your experience as a governor there, and that kind of the career diversity is really interesting as well. So we're going from being a governor for 20 years, Caris, to being a governor for 6 months. Tell us about your journey to becoming a governor during lockdown.
Thanks, Hannah. So my background is that I'm a lawyer at a commercial law firm called Linklaters. That's my day job. And I've been a lawyer for almost 5 years, and I specialize in dispute resolution. I became school governor, like you say, about 5 months ago. 6 months ago at a primary school in Islington last year. So I'm still quite new to the role, and pretty much all of my experience has been during the pandemic, and all meetings have been virtual. However, I was lucky enough to tour the school, meet the chair and the head and the pupils just before the pandemic began. In terms of how I became a governor, I was quite interested for a while in stepping into the education sort of forum, but I didn't know the best way how. But luckily, my firm had a link with a organisation called Governors for Schools, and so I just applied via them, sent in my application and sent in my personal statement, and then away we went. And a few months down the line, it took a while, but I'm now a school governor at primary school, which is very exciting. So I had a few reasons for wanting to be a school governor. Firstly, I'm quite passionate about education, and because I chose a career where my role is not directly linked to education, I wanted to be involved in a different way. And I decided that the best way was to be a school governor because I wanted to directly contribute to the next generation of pupils' education experience. And I thought that with the skill set that I've gained by being a lawyer, I could do that very effectively as a school governor. For example, I'm on the resource committee in my primary school, which requires analysing different sources of information, coming to reasonable conclusions while solving problems. So all pretty similar to my day job. And I'm glad I became a school governor because if I think back to when I was at school, similar to what Jordan said earlier, the governors were quite anonymous to me. And all I could imagine was a bunch of ancient white men. But my governing board isn't quite like that, thankfully. But I'm glad that I've brought some diversity to the board, as there are no other black men. And as Cheryl just mentioned, your background is quite important to who you are and the job that you're able to do. And for me, it's particularly important because I think it's important that not only do the pupils get to see a black man on the board, and which I think could inspire some black pupils, or at least allow them to think of me as relatable, especially given I'm quite young as well. But it's also important for other black professionals to know that becoming a school governor is a worthwhile cause. I think community has been a bit of a running theme here, and I think the community impact is also very important. Islington isn't my community, it's not where I grew up, but it's quite similar to my own community, which is Kensington and Chelsea. And so I also value the community impact quite a lot as well. As a professional, I think you have much to offer and you can bring a different perspective to a teacher governor or a parent governor, for example. Your experience and your expertise can also be very relevant. For example, legal or financial skills are always very helpful in the role. But not only do you impart your own knowledge and apply your own skills, there's also a lot to gain from the role itself. So, for example, since being a governor, I've learned much more about the primary school system and the appropriate strategies necessary, the relationship between the governing board and the head, which I had no idea about before. And I've also been given the opportunity to serve on the independent appeal panel and the independent review panel for school admissions and exclusions in Islington, which is an opportunity that I don't think would have come without being in this role. So overall, very happy and excited to be a governor. I think it's a worthwhile cause, and I'm in a privileged position to affect generational change via my own skills and my own voice as a black professional. And I would definitely encourage anybody interested in the position to apply.
Thank you, all five of you. And there's diversity in your stories, but there's also some commonalities and some golden threads I want to tease out as well. And I feel like we need to do some debunking about what governance isn't. So you've all kind of like outlined what governance is and what your role is. I mean, if we were going to debunk some of the things that perhaps people think that governance is, that it isn't, like Jordan, what's one thing that perhaps you've debunked in your head about the role of the governor?
It doesn't have to be boring. is the key thing. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of meetings, there's committees and all of that sort of stuff. You got to be there for that. You're not going to wrangle your way out. So yeah, there are those, but it's what's happened behind those numbers. So for me, one of the most, so I thought it was just that, and that you've got to be some old dude with, you know, like elbow pads rocking up to these meetings after school and it's really dull. Whereas actually it's not. That's a fraction of it. So, for example, we do achievements assemblies. Well, did. So we would have. So we've got over 2,000 kids in our secondary school, and we'll have 300 in a year group, and you're handing out awards for them in the mornings at assemblies. And it might be because I don't know, their class 100% attendance or their special recognition. That is easily the best way to start a day. I'd be so excited to go to these. I didn't think I'd get to go to do that as a school governor. So there's so much more to it than just what you think it would be. And even those meetings, you get to see the passion on staff's faces because of the work they've done, because of that impact that young person has made in their class that day. And you still get that via Zoom or Teams or whatever it might be. So yeah, there's a lot more to it than just boring meetings and stuff like that.
Thank you, Jordan. How about you, JC? The vision you had of governance versus the reality. What do you want to unpack?
Well, do you know what? I literally don't think I ever met a school governor in my own education. So I didn't know what they looked like, but I think I would have assumed, yeah, white man, 55 plus, completely unconnected to school, or a parent governor, in which case they probably looked like my mum or my aunt, who I kind of already knew. I didn't represent either of those. So kind of felt like I was a bit different, but always embraced that. I guess you don't have to be an expert on it all. I went in terrified thinking, I do know a bit about education, but I'm not a finance person. I'm not a legal person. And oh God, how am I going to add to that conversation? And actually the reality is you don't have to be an expert in it all, because the whole point of a diverse governing body is you've got the range of skills and expertise that bring that. And so actually bringing me and what I can add value to, and kind of developing some expertise within the governing role, as I said, in my instance, safeguarding, actually has been really liberating and made me kind of reinforce the message to anyone that I talk about governance to, is actually don't think you've got to be something other than yourself, because they want you for your skill set that you're bringing, and you take out of it what you choose to take out of it, and develop your own skills within that.
Thank you, Josie. And looping that to what you said, Alex, about skills and kind of like the cross-transferable skills that you didn't know you had that actually then are serving you as a governor. Like what was your perception of the skills you perhaps needed to be a governor, which you realised you didn't need, or the skills that you didn't know that you had, which actually you can apply as a governor? Any thoughts on that, Alex?
Well, I suppose, yeah, I thought, I thought I'd have to sort of spend some of my spare evenings essentially learning everything teachers or even head teachers learn, and obviously you do need to get familiar with the job they're doing enough to evaluate it, but you don't have to sort of become a part-time educational professional to be able to contribute. You know, a lot of skills that people a lot of the skills that are most useful for governors to have, having now recruited a number of governors to our board, are not skills that people get from elsewhere. Various soft skills, experience, dealing with different people in different organizations, and just having as many different perspectives around the table as possible. There may be staff governors or maybe a head teacher in another school on the board, but also, like my board, we have lots of people from a whole range of backgrounds: public sector, private sector, academics, parents, all kinds, and all are able to contribute in a myriad of ways. But similarly to others have said, I had lots of misconceptions about the kind of people who were school governors or could be school governors. I sort of thought retired community elders, maybe magistrates and local councillors, and so on. And but no, it's a whole range of people, and can be a whole range of people. It is a time commitment, but it's one that can be worked around all kinds of other commitments. Whether you're a parent or quite intense, full-on careers. The diversity very much is a strength to any school board.
Thank you, Alex. And if I can come back to you, Cheryl, like you talked about confidence, and you didn't say imposter syndrome, but I imagine that first time you sat in that first governing meeting 20 years ago, it was like, oh my gosh, someone's going to find me out. They're going to ask me to leave the room in a second. How has your confidence grown? And like, what are the skills that you either train governors in, or that you are looking for in governors?
Well, it's quite interesting because bear in mind, I started my journey 20 years ago. Unfortunately, I walked into the room and saw what you probably would sort of still perceive as a governing board actually existed. So I was the only, now bear in mind, this is 20 years ago, I was the only young female on that board because everybody else was male and in their mid-50s, if not retired. So I walked in there and my first thought was, what have I done? So, you know, you just think, oh my goodness, I'm going to stand out like a sore thumb. And I think if anything, that made me more determined to get as much induction and training as possible so I could actually have that voice quite quickly. And as I said earlier on, our chair of our board was so encouraging about, you know, no question's a silly question. And like I say, we see that at Agbis. But it's reading the paperwork, but understanding what you're looking for. Because 20 years ago, you used to be given, you know, way before technology, a bundle of paperwork, and it was probably about that thick. And you're thinking, we've got to read all that before each board meeting and before each subcommittee. And you didn't know what the salient features were. There's no summary documents. And for me, I think time has evolved. So you said earlier on, Hannah, having a clerk, a really good clerk, is so essential to your governors, because that will help you gain confidence, because the clerk will prepare papers for you that will give you like summary sheets, and they'll say, you know, if you're going to have agenda items, what you need to look for and what are the supporting papers to evidence that. So it allows you to use your time really effectively. I would always advocate going on training for whatever subcommittee you're on if you don't know that information, but also buddy with somebody who's experienced on your board, because, you know, just going out when we used to be able to go out and having a chat over, you know, a drink about, you know, what are the key issues for the school? What should I be bringing? You've been recruited because of your skill set, so you have a voice. So it's knowing what are the issues for that school and how you can address them. And just remember, you're there for a purpose.
Brilliant advice there, Cheryl. Thank you. And coming to you, Karis, like bearing in mind that you're relatively new to being a governor, it's all happened during remote existence. Like, what sort of induction and training have you received this year from your school to really empower you in this role?
So firstly, I have to be very grateful to my chair, because he was very efficient and organised in bringing me up to speed and ensuring that I always felt comfortable in my role. And he also made a very big effort to make sure that all of the other governors welcomed me onto the board. There was also somebody else who came on with me at the same time, and so we were both new together, and that was quite nice because we could communicate with each other, ask each other for support. If we had any silly questions, we'd message each other in private and then figure out the answer to them. So that was also really helpful and really nice. In terms of training, Governance for Schools, the portal I mentioned earlier, they have provided me with a lot of separate training or resources that I can access, as well as my school. And so I had some training for beginners a few months ago. That was really useful because it set out the basics, and the basics are always a good place to start. Explain the primary school system, the governing body system, what your role is, and put it all in a very general sort of framework for you to understand and adopt your own school going forwards. And that's what I've done so far. And so all of that combined has been really helpful and really effective.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to throw this question out to you all, so just pop your hand if you want to answer it. So, just listening to all the different routes to how you became a governor, and we know that there were multiple organisations, we're working with 5 of them on this, like, how do you choose which organisation to approach? And then how do you choose the school to then accept? Because we've got a question in the chat here about, like, if you're getting multiple offers to be a governor, how do you then work out which schools perhaps the right fit for you? Does anyone want to go first on that? Josie?
I mean, yeah, as I said, I did sort of go via my borough and did have contact, or was given some names of some local schools. And I was really in a bit of a dilemma. Like I said, this secondary was right on my doorstep. And I had to kind of step back and go, hang on, I've got to make this work for me too. Realistically, it's on my doorstep. I can literally step across the road after a meeting at 8 o'clock, finishing at 8 o'clock at night when I've done a whole day at work. What am I going to be able to add value to, but also, not feel like I am spending another hour travelling my way home. Be a bit selfish about that. I think that's, was really important. I absolutely made the right decision then. I think differently now, but I think going into it in the first instance, that was really important. That kind of literally the proximity, beyond just the fact that I was committed to the community, just the practicality of it being on my doorstep was really significant, and was definitely a decision maker for me.
Thank you. Thank you, Josie.
So bear that in mind.
Brilliant. So proximity, practicality, kind of like what are the potential barriers to you going to the meetings and fully showing up, and how could you perhaps remove some of them? So I think that's really honest. Has someone got a different perspective on how they selected either the organisation they recruited through or the school they accepted? Jordan, and then Karis. Go on, Jordan.
Pull up the school, put my hand up. For me, it was about where I'd get most value from it, being selfish, to be honest. So my day job is around careers, work experience, all world of work stuff for young people. And we only work with 11 to 18-year-olds. So for me, it was because I was offered primary schools and stuff. I thought, well, that doesn't really relate to me right now. Whereas the school, I was keen to work on their careers and IAG and all of that sort of stuff with them, because that's where my experience lies. So for me, it was how does it fit in around work commitments as well. So I can add value given my knowledge, and likewise I get that out of it, and so do they. So that was a huge part of it. And in terms of who, it was just because I've got an email, so I went with I think School's Choice locally. So yeah, but it's nice to feel wanted if you had multiple offers, so it's all right.
Well, I love the honesty, because actually the more efficient the organisation are on their comms, the more likely we are. And I can remember applying to be governor ages ago, and they didn't have any vacancies near me, and I got quite frustrated because I wanted to be a governor. So I think that's really honest, and I don't think it is selfish, Jordan. A lot of people say I think I was a bit selfish in my selection process. It's transactional, isn't it? Like, what value can I add, and what value am I going to get? Because actually, you're all gifting your time and expertise, and there should be some sort of reciprocity there, and that kind of two-way process. So I think what I'm hearing is, like, be really clear on what you're looking for and what your non-negotiables are. So a bit like when we choose a job, like being really clear on what is it I have to offer, and how far am I prepared to travel, and which meeting slots are going to fit around my lifestyle, for example. How about you, Karis? What were you going to add?
So it's closely related to what Jordan and Josie have just said, really. But for me, I think flexibility was quite important on both my side and on the school side. So initially, I had applied for secondary schools, and they were my preference. But that was taking quite a while because there weren't any vacancies. And in the meantime, I was being offered primary schools, and I was just turning them down. And then I had a conversation with someone at governance schools, and they said, "Hey, like, what really is the reasoning for wanting to go to a secondary school rather than primary school?" My reasons weren't that strong, after all. And so I changed my mind, and I went for the primary schools as well. I got on pretty quickly, but they weren't quite flexible in terms of what they wanted from governors. They were asking me to come in short term, during the day, and be available on weekends. And I thought, some of this is just going to be impossible. So unless you sort of be a bit more flexible and make some exceptions, then I can't do this. And I know I can't. And I'd rather get that out of the way now and be clear on what we both expect from each other, rather than running into problems later down the line, or you're giving only half an effort or something like that, which is out of question, really. And so they weren't very flexible, and I wasn't very flexible. But then I was offered a different school, and I met the head and I met the chair, and they were a lot more flexible. They had certain hard requirements, which is fine and what I expected, but they were more flexible about how they got things done. For example, some of the subcommittee meetings were starting at 4 p.m., which is quite difficult for me sometimes. But they said sometimes we have them in the morning, 8 a.m. for example. I said, oh, I'd much prefer to do something like that. That'd be a lot easier, and I can guarantee attendance. And they were like, oh, okay. Have a discussion with everyone, see if everybody else can make it. And that was really important for me because it made it a lot more collaborative and a lot more useful for me. And so the flexibility on both sides, both the school and myself, was really helpful. So I think that's quite important.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Just that absolute clarity of your availability, what you're looking for, what you need. Again, it's that two-way process. And I'm interested from any of you to comment on this about, like, are your employers supportive of you being governors? Because I know that some organisations almost encourage everyone to be a governor or to go and do volunteer work in a local school, and there's almost like release time as part of that kind of like corporate culture. Cheryl, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I was very fortunate because I started my governor training when it was part of when I was an inspector of the Audit Commission. But we had in our contracts that if you were a governor, that you were classed as community days. So therefore, you were released to do that because it was all about adding value. And anybody who's been involved, say, in a heads recruitment, which if you haven't been, you probably will be at some point in your governor journey, that's quite time consuming. And I can remember going to my line manager saying they want me to be part of a heads recruitment. In practical terms, that could take about 6 or 7 days by the time you go through the advert, look to your person spec, go through all the different stages of a heads. Is that going to be possible? Because that technically takes me over my allocation for my community days. And they said, go for it, because again, it's a skill set that you can add back into the Audit Commission, which is brilliant. And it's picking up what Carissa said as well, because if you find a school that's quite diverse, and we advocate this at Agbis, where you review systematically timings of meetings to make sure that you're being inclusive to your governors. And if you are moving away from traditionally having all your meetings in the evening, you probably will get more diverse governors, because if businesses do allow you that flexibility, it's so important and convenient to go to a meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning, or say at 4 o'clock, and then just keep your board meetings to an evening. And what we're finding at Agbis, we've got over 800 members, and it's a school that's a member. So if you then multiply that by 10 or 12 governors, that you've got to think of a positive from COVID. So we've been in lockdown for a year, and what we've found is, because we've had to go online for governor meetings, they're now actually starting to really embrace flexibility. So they're saying that 2020 was a record year for governor attendance at meetings, because you've got a captured audience. So what we're saying is, you need to harness that, because when was the last time you said to your governing board, are these meetings convenient, or have you done them always at 7 o'clock at night for the last 20 years? Because you've got an issue with recruitment. Have you asked yourself why you've got an issue with recruitment? And what we're finding is that most of our member schools are coming back now and saying that going forward, when we do eventually get out of lockdown, they're probably going to keep their subcommittees virtual, because it's time convenient to their members, but then meet face to face for their termly board meetings. And I think that's a massive way forward for governing board, because they're actually asking the question, we want you as governors, we want to keep our governors with their terms of office, but obviously have enough for succession planning. But are we being convenient to you to actually allow you to come to our meetings?
I think it's such a good point, and I've read so much this year about how actually by us going virtual for governance meetings, it's more inclusive for parents and carers, it's more inclusive for people with responsibilities in the evenings who couldn't normally become a governor, and actually we've got more diversity of people volunteering to be governors because it's flexible and because it's virtual, and it's how we get that balance. Because I think Jonathan's point's really key. Like, I've been a governor in a school where it was all out of hours and you felt quite detached from the school community, and then all of my governance meetings when I was a head teacher were during the school day, because I wanted the governors to be seen in the school and to be able to come and do lesson walks and assemblies. So I think it's perhaps that balance. Alex, any thoughts about that professional straddling of organisations recommending or encouraging people to be governors?
Well, at ours, we found for the time being, obviously for the time being doesn't mean much in the lockdown context, because we'll have to review everything when we come out of lockdown. But for the time being, we're having all of our full governing board meetings in the evenings, because that's the time when people can attend. We've had to move it around a bit in the past and review it quite regularly to see if which evenings are going to work for people, and about other meetings that may need to take place during the day, or some things that governors have to get involved in. have fixed times and will have relatively fixed times and dates anyway. If you're dealing with offset inspections or school visits, monitoring things that have to coincide with things they're monitoring, and so on. But I'm aware of. I know someone who applied to be a governor at one school and was unable to because they were very inflexible about their policies and in terms of governors' time commitments, and it wasn't going to be compatible with working full time in where he was working. So the key is to be flexible, because otherwise, you can end up the extreme end. You have the problems with some things, like one of the problems of the magistracy is getting volunteers from younger ages and different backgrounds, but at the same time demanding people be free for X number of working days during working hours per year, when a relatively limited number of people are going to be free for that. So I think boards have to be as flexible as possible. I quite like the approach that someone mentioned of when you're applying to be a governor at a school, inquiring about that and seeing what room for negotiation there is, because there are a lot of schools where they'll just not have reviewed this for a long time. There are a lot of school boards where, as people have said, they may say, well, we meet at this time, and you can say, well, is there any flexibility on that? And it may well be there's total flexibility on that. They've just never considered it. And especially to, on my board, one of the drivers of this has been parent governors as well, who will, and governors who are not parent governors, but are the parents of young children, because they'll have certain demands in their time. And it's important boards meet that, because otherwise, if inflexibility results in a lack of diversity, and I hope employers, a lot of employers are embracing this, from what I gather, volunteering days and so on, and holidays off to do things like be a school governor.
Thank you, Alex. And we've got two interesting comments or questions that are coming through. They're almost in contradiction, so I want to unpack both of them. Someone's asked the question about the fact that it sometimes feels quite competitive, making yourself stand out as a governor for a school to pick you. Any thoughts on that? About if it feels competitive, how do you present yourself as the kind of the best option? Any thoughts on? Have you found it competitive? Is that just someone's perspective? Josie, what are you thinking?
That isn't something that's resonated with me. And actually, as I said, originally I'd looked at being governor for primary schools because I knew there was just a crying need. People have said that to me. You think about the number of primary schools in the country compared to secondary. So I just knew there was the appetite. So I actually felt like it was, as we were just talking about before, it was me about going, oh, where shall I go? And that, a little bit of pressure of that without really, knowing where to start, and actually ended up obviously not going with any of the primary schools. So I haven't felt that sort of competitiveness. I think when I first joined the board, there was an element of me, a bit like Charles said, that slight imposter syndrome, thinking, oh God, I don't look like any of these people here. What am I bringing to it? I was a new governor that started on my own. Others have been involved. As I said, it was becoming an academy and have been involved in that transition. And I sort of kind of came and going, what are all these acronyms? I don't know what you're talking about. But I just had to kind of go, just take it as it comes for the first academic year. And I think until you've done an academic year and understand the cycle of education, a lot of it doesn't really make sense. And you do kind of learn new things constantly and then go, what should I have known what that was related to? Until you've done that full year, I don't think you ever can have a real understanding of what an academic year and all the bits and constituent parts in terms of being a governor, results and feedback of that is. So no, I didn't feel that personally.
Thank you, JC. Kaz, do you want to jump in? What were your thoughts on this idea of making yourself stand out?
I did. So I had applied for primary schools in the end, and there was one primary school where I'd gone and interviewed, and it turned out that there was someone else who was also in contention for the role. But then what the primary school had did was sort of pit us against each other and invite us both to another joint interview where we were supposed to sort of explain why we would be chosen over the other person. And I thought that sort of process was quite odd because you were encouraging competition, but not in a healthy way. And so that kind of put me off, and I didn't end up going to the interview purely because of that, really. And it wasn't that I was afraid of competition or anything like that, but I thought that the school had created a bad impression of itself, and it didn't necessarily sit right with me how they were conducting the process. But then, in very stark contrast, the school that I'm now at, the one that I ended up at, a similar sort of process was run, in that there was only one spot, but there were two governors who were to be co-opted. And the head and the chair were both very supportive of both of us, and encouraging both of us to apply, to do our best, and really try to make sure that there were two spots for both of us because they liked both of us. And in the end, maybe just by pure chance, another role opened up and we were both co-opted at the same time. But the way that each school went about doing that was very different. And the school that I'm now at created a very healthy atmosphere for competition. It was even collaborative to a certain extent as well. And we got on really well. And so I think it really depends on how the school approaches it, and how they approach their own vacancies and how they fill them.
Yeah, I was going to say it is interesting just comparing, isn't it? Because it says a lot about the culture of the school and a lot about perhaps how they do recruitment for other members of staff as well. And tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's a law or a rule about how many governors you need to have. Because one of the things that keeps coming up about, well, Terry, your face is saying you can challenge me on that, but in other webcasts, we've talked about the fact that one of the barriers to diversifying governance can sometimes be there's 6 governing seats and they're all filled by a certain person for a certain demographic, but you can build a longer table, can't you, and add extra people. So Cheryl, what are your thoughts on that?
It depends on what your constitution says. So it's interesting because I've had a similar experience to Cara. So when I was chair of governors, our culture in our school was the positive, so the second school, Caris. So we were very fortunate, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky because as a school recruiting, you never know who you're going to get, and you don't. And unless you've got a very good succession plan, you might have, say, a successful recruitment campaign, and you get 2 or 3 really good candidates, but you don't know if that'll happen again in the future. So if you get 2 or 3 good candidates, the last thing you want to do is lose them. So what you can do is say you've got a vacancy for 1 parent governor, and that's what your constitution says, but you get 3. You can then select 1 who's going to be a parent governor, and then you could co-opt 2, depending on what your articles say, because you want to keep them in the mix, and you want, if they've come forward with a really, really good skill set, then the last thing you want to do is put them off. And that means you've got a succession plan built in for the next few years as well. So all I would say is check your constitution, because you don't want to turn anybody away, but you can be creative with co-opting. Because I started being a community governor, then I ended up having to be a parent governor because of that very reason. And the next round of recruitment, they got some really good parent governors. So they kicked me off as a parent to make me a community to fill those spots because I could, because of my background. So just be creative.
That's great. And there's a couple of interesting comments coming up here about processes. So some of the governors listening weren't interviewed to be a governor, no interview at all. So they're commenting, Karis, on the fact that you've had to jump through quite a few loops to become a governor. So that's an interesting comparison. And we've got some comments coming through about other potential barriers. We've talked about time and inflexibility. How about expenses? Alex, do you want to speak about this one? Like, can your governors claim any expenses for travel to meetings?
We can. At the moment, it's not. No one has any expenses, or no one's claiming any expenses in our board for some reason. But you can probably figure out yourselves. But that's pretty. Having that there is pretty crucial for ensuring accessibility to meetings. But as someone mentioned, the silver lining of the pandemic for schools, maybe you mentioned this yourself, is that measures sort of had to be taken now will remain on the table as tools that may be useful going forwards. Whether that is subcommittees meeting virtually, whether it is coincidentally in our last full governing board meeting before the first lockdown, we actually started putting together the option for governors to join remotely in order to allow for greater accessibility, which is actually seemed like it was going to be quite awkward or difficult to do then, but now seems a lot easier now that we're all doing that for everything, whether we like it or not. But in terms of governor recruitment and access, well, firstly, the thing of dueling candidates against each other sounds like an unproductive approach, to say the least. But certainly, in terms of as chair of governors, I'd certainly always be interested to hear from anyone who has any kind of unusual or diverse experience that they could contribute, because a lot of the stuff the skills that should be common to all governors, a lot of them you can learn as long as you're serious and committed about it, work through inductions and training. So having any kind of wider experience, and that doesn't have to be in the professions, or any particular background or the other. It doesn't have to be through having been on governing boards. And certainly I wouldn't like to see a closed shop where only people who've been school governors can become school governors and so on. So all kinds of experience should be useful. And boards, even if they have the full number of governors, it's for boards to consider whether or not they might want to add an associate governor, and so on, if they think someone might be able to provide useful input. At the same time, you have to make sure boards don't have a board of 20 members and so on, but that's not going to be the case for most schools. Most schools are going to be somewhere below their maximum number of members in most of the country. London has quite a lot of full boards, but even then you have quite a high turnover of people standing down for all kinds of reasons. So I would encourage people to continue to look around and contact schools directly as well, because lots of schools kind of need to recruit, but there's a tendency among some school boards to put off recruitment as well.
Thank you, Alex. And it's interesting, some comments coming through here about potential questions to ask if you're looking at a governance role around, is there a training budget? Can you claim for babysitting as a single parent through the expenses policy to enable you to go to meetings? So I think there's some creative approaches here to removing barriers, perhaps, to enable diverse people to step forward. And the other comment that came through that was in contradiction to that competitive question was about people feeling like the imposter and feeling like they don't know what questions to ask in the actual meetings. Like, Jordan, how did you go about navigating the meetings and like knowing when to add voice and when to ask questions? I
think you need to listen a lot. You need to understand what's going on before you ask questions, because you don't want to put your foot in it on the first meeting and act like you know what's going on, because you don't. It's as simple as that. And I've got 2 other board roles outside of being a governor and then the day job. And in the current one, I'm probably 6 months in, and I'm only now starting to understand what's going on. So it now enables me to make more informed decisions. So I would say listen a lot, speak to your other governors, understand the school. You'll only understand so much going to those meetings. If you can, get on a learning walk virtually, speak to other heads of departments, speak to teaching staff, speak to the teaching assistants, speak to as many people as you can, speak to the students and the parents. That, I think that's one thing we have to forget, speak to the students, even though that's what you're there for. Try to listen as much as possible. That's my advice. And then you can make more informed decisions, because you'll understand how the school works a lot better. Because as I say, you don't want to go into the first meeting and think, I know it all, a dummy training course, get out of the way, this is what we're doing. Don't be that person. Listen a lot and then make more informed decisions and questions.
Thank you, Jordan. Good. Josie, do you want to add?
I was going to say, yeah, and also don't assume that everyone in the room knows more than you do. So going back to the acronyms, it's a great example of I learned I probably kept my mouth shut too long in that first maybe 6 months, or almost a whole academic year, and just kind of then would go home and Google and work it out or ask other people, and then just at one point asked, and everyone else went, oh yeah, we wanted to know what that meant. And the education environment is constantly evolving, and teachers live and breathe, or school staff live and breathe lots of these things all the time. And actually just being, like we said earlier, no question's a stupid question, and just kind of going, can we just clarify what that is? And what we've now done is, what we have asked in our papers is, if you're looking at a new bit of strategy, or when kind of Progress 8 and all of the lot came in, can you just give us a bit of a overview of what that is, or remind us in the first thing what that acronym stands for, because we get that you're using it, but we don't speak this language every day, all day.
It's such a key point, Josie. And I know as a head teacher, but as an English teacher, that the acronyms I know were very off-putting. And I'm sure this is a normal habit now, but like, we always encourage questions to be submitted before the meeting, because actually people perhaps might feel more confident to read the papers and submit some questions which get collated by the clerk, and you don't necessarily know who's asked which question. But also, I as the head teacher can be ready for some of those questions, because I'm all over having critical friends, but sometimes after a long day when you're knackered, you do feel like perhaps the critical friendship could just like go a little bit gentler. So let me ask you all to sum up then, like, for people who are listening, who are perhaps sort of like one toe in, thinking about becoming a governor, what's your encouragement for them to do it, and what's your top tip for them about how to go about finding the right governing role in the right organisation? So let me come to you first, Cheryl. What's your sum up? What's your takeaway for everyone?
My takeaway is just do it. All right. You would be snapped up, seriously snapped up. So you just need to make a choice. Do you want to go into the state sector or the independent sector? If you want to go to the independent sector, contact me, because I'll have an honest conversation with you, and I'll match you to a school that'll be near where you are for practical reasons. So if you're listening, just contact Cheryl at training@agbis.org.uk. If you want to go to the maintained sector, then contact your local borough or county council. But what I would say is, don't be scared, just do it, because you'll add so much value.
I love that. Don't be scared, just do it. Alex, what's your takeaway? What's your top tip?
Well, aside from echoing all of that, yeah, definitely, I'd say throw everything at the wall and see what fits, and that both see which schools are interested in you, see which schools would work for you as well, because before you get into sort of the difference between the issues at this school or that school and so on, if one governing board does things in a way, and inflexibly does things in a way that aren't going to allow you to contribute very well, it's a moot point anyway. So just throw everything at the wall and apply, right to boards directly, borough, council, inspiring governance, whichever, and then see who wants to talk to you, and then you talk to them and ask them about how they do things. And then if it doesn't work for you, ask if there's flexibility, and make some suggestions, and then see what works. And then beyond that, maybe you can consider which school versus the other and which issues, but really any school where you can contribute, you should contribute. It's a pleasure and an honor, and it will be enjoyable for you as well.
Thank you, Alex. How about you, Karis? What's your key takeaway?
I think you said earlier, for those who have got 1 foot in, 1 foot out, I don't think that's an effective way to live life in general. So just put 2 feet in, go for it. You're probably worth more than you think you are as well. If you're a bit doubtful about your skills and abilities, you probably have a lot to contribute. As everybody's explained here today, diversity of thought is really important as well. And basically nobody's going to have the exact same background. So use your own personality and your own background to your strength, and just go for it. It's quite rewarding as well. It's a very worthwhile experience, and you're sure to enjoy it and like it. And just surprise yourself, because just by applying, you never know what can happen. I applied via Governance for Schools, and I think they were very easy to work with. So try and do that if you're a professional. Or if you work for a particular company, you never know, they may already have links or connections with a certain organization that helps with voluntary positions. And so maybe just reach out to them in the first instance. But if not, just apply via your local council or Governance for Schools.
Thank you, Karis. Josie, how about you? What's your takeaway tip?
Just ask questions. Ask questions about what you need to ask questions about of other governors and people in it, but also don't be afraid to ask what you think is a stupid question, because no question is ever stupid.
I love that. Says the journalist. Just ask questions. Ask questions. I love that. And Jordan, final takeaway tip from you.
Just get at it. Bloody enjoy it. Make a difference. Yeah. Stop listening to us. Get on with it. That's my takeaway. And also, when you're there, think about, Karis just mentioned it, diversity of thought. Just because you might have a lot of faces that look different ages and genders and sexes, etc., around the table, doesn't mean you're all thinking differently. So give that some thought around what's the experience, what's the background. Diversity is one thing, but actually, how is that changing? There's no point putting a lot of different faces around the table to tick a box. Are you all thinking differently and adding value? Are you challenging each other? So think about that. But yeah, just do it. Stop wasting time and get on it.
I love that. Just do it. Call to action. Just do it. So thank you very much to all five of you for gifting your time this afternoon. I always appreciate that you are volunteers already. You're volunteering more time. But I really hope that it lands with the people who are listening today, who are professionals, who are prospective governors. And our final webcast is on Saturday, and that is addressing, if you are in education, why go and be a governor in a different school. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and take care.